Words of joy and hope. The fifth Sunday in Ordinary Time, Year C. Gospel according to Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. Commentary of Father Fernando Armelini. A good Sunday to all. 2 Sundays ago, the evangelist Luke already presented Jesus in Nazareth. We remember that visit was not a success. They esteemed him, they loved him well, but when in the synagogue he made clear the program he was determined to carry out, they threw him out. Now they had the confirmation that the rumors the rabbis had spread about him were not without a foundation. He was preaching and announcing a God who loved not only the children of Abraham, but to all freely without distinction. This was clearly a heresy for the traditionalists of Nazareth, who had learned in the catechesis that God's blessings were reserved for the children of Abraham. When Jesus was expelled, he returned to Capernaum, where he had already established his residence for some time in Peter's house. There he began again to preach and to heal the sick. Today, the Gospel passage relates an episode that took place on the shore of the Lake of Galilee. Since Jesus spent the 3 years of his public life around this lake, I think it is worthwhile to dedicate a few words to introduce it. In the background, I have placed a picture taken from a satellite. You can see the Mediterranean Sea, in the Bible called Yam Gadol, the Great Sea, and then the Lake of Galilee, whose beauty makes it look like a nest in the middle of mountains. The Dead Sea is seen in the background, and between the Lake of Galilee and the Dead Sea flows the river Jordan. What was the name of this lake? In the Old Testament and the Gospels, we find many names. We remember them. The oldest is Kinneret, derived from the Hebrew term kinor, which means harp. In fact, this lake is shaped like a harp. And there was a city that was called Kinneret, and it was located on a hill about 3 kilometers from Capernaum towards the west. It was so important that it is mentioned in Egyptian documents as a protection of the road leading to the east. From this word derives the present name, Lake of Gennesaret. Later it was also called the Lake of Galilee, and a Lake of Tiberias, when Herod Antipas founded the city of Tiberias. This lake is located 200 meters below the sea level. It is 21 kilometers long, and the maximum width is 15 kilometers. And its maximum depth is 45 to 50 meters. Along the shores of this lake, there are 3 fertile plains helped by the tropical climate, and today there are at least 2 harvests per year in these 3 plains. One is at the northern end where Bethsaida rises. Then to the west of the lake is the fertile plain of Gennesaret, where today there is a kibbutz. And then the third plain, Degania, where the first kibbutz was established in 1909. The waters of this lake are calm and beautiful. There are no storms in this lake, but in the rabbinic literature, it is also presented with the characteristics of the sea, and it is described as the deep, dark abyss, a symbol of the primordial chaos where everything is confusing and life is impossible. We remember the chaos before God began creation by separating light from darkness, the water above from the water below, and then the water from the dry land. in the rabbinical literature is called the Sea of Galilee, acquiring the connotations of the sea and therefore the seat of the forces of evil, impurities, demonic forces. Therefore, we are not surprised that when Jesus expels the impurity of the pagan lands, this impurity ends up in the swine, an impure animal, and these end up in their house in the sea. Let us pay attention to this symbolism of the lake that at times is called a sea, and if we take certain episodes as a chronicle, we don't understand anything anymore. When it is called a sea, it has a theological message, a biblical symbolism that the evangelist makes. We also want to remember some cities that rose along these shores. Let us keep in mind that at the time of Jesus, the shores of this lake were much more populated than today. There were villages everywhere, also because it was an important fishing place. And then there are these fertile plains with abundant water. Remember Tiberias, which you see in the background, which King Herod Antipas founded, and the emperor's name was Tiberius, hence the name in honor of the powerful man of the time. And then there is Magdala and the important place of Capernaum, where Jesus established his residence. A few kilometers from Capernaum, a little further north is Chorazin, and then Bethsaida, from where 5 apostles came: Peter, Andrew, James, John, and Philip. Peter and Andrew had left their hometown and settled in Capernaum. You may also note Gerasa. This city was located east of the lake and therefore in a pagan land. It was not the Holy Land, and therefore, when Jesus comes to this pagan land, it is not surprising that his word expels impunity, expels those demons that dehumanize. Let us be attentive. When speaking about this sea, the reference is to a theological language with biblical images. Otherwise, it can lead us to confusion and not grasp the evangelist's message. Let us listen now to what Luke tells us.
While the crowd was pressing in on Jesus and listening to the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. He saw 2 boats alongside the lake. The fishermen had disembarked and washed their nets. Getting into one of the boats belonged to Simon. He asked him to put out a short distance from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowd from the boat.
The scene was carefully composed by Luke and is precious in every detail. Let us try to reconstruct it. Jesus is surrounded by the crowd listening to his word. We always find Jesus surrounded by the people when he proclaims the gospel, and no wonder, because we are well made, we experience the need for this word. Consciously or not, everyone feels a deep need in their heart for the word of the gospel, the only one that fills our lives with meaning. We could then also ask ourselves why today there are no people around us, the preachers, at our side to listen to the word that we announce. Perhaps because it does not correspond well to the word of the Master, or it is not announced with the same conviction and the same love. Let us now look at a second scene. Jesus sees 2 boats in the distance near the shore, and he sees fishers, and later we will be told who these fishermen are. They are two pairs of brothers working in partnership. They are off the boats on a weekday and they are busy at work and they are cleaning their nets, which is the most boring job. The greater part of the day for the fishermen of the lake of Tiberias was spent cleaning their nets. They are also in a bad mood because they didn't catch anything during the night. Who are they? They are the disciples. We know that Jesus healed Peter's mother in law and is a guest in Peter's house. But it is not enough to be a disciple. They do not belong to the multitudes. They stand apart from the multitude. They already know Jesus. But it is not enough for him to have disciples. Disciples come from discere, to share. One learns the lesson from the master and commits himself to embody it in his own life. This is not enough for Jesus, and this is the central message of today's gospel. What does Jesus do now with this group of disciples? He goes to them, enters Simon's boat, and asks him to move a little from the land. Let us notice that Luke begins to emphasize the figure of Peter. It is Peter's boat, and this Peter makes available the boat so that Jesus can announce his gospel. In all the work of Luke, in the gospel and in the Acts of the Apostles, when he presents the life of Christian community, Luke will emphasize that it is always Peter who enters the scene in the moments when they have to make choices and make important decisions. He will be the one to take the ultimate responsibility. Peter has an important mission to carry out. And it is the boat in which Peter is present from where Jesus proclaims his gospel. Today also, that boat must proclaim the gospel. We have already begun to understand what it represents. It is the Christian community. In fact, Jesus sits in his boat and begins to speak to the multitudes. Not a realistic picture if taken as a chronicle. Just think how uncomfortable it is to talk from a rickety boat to a large crowd. When I used to accompany groups to Tagba, I would have them observe this scene. Thus, the impossibility of speaking to a large crowd from a boat. The scene is a parable, wants to tell us what happens in the Christian community from which the Master's word goes out, and it must reach all humanity, the great multitude. Peter then begins to get involved in this announcement. What does he do at this point? He doesn't announce the word yet, but he makes his boat available. And here we can have a very practical and actual message. Something similar can be done even today when Jesus asks that we make something of our life available so that his gospel can be proclaimed. There are many people today who, for example, make a room in their house available to Bible sharing groups so that sisters and brothers can meet to reflect on the Word of God. Peter has made his boat available. Even today, true disciples are called to make something available if they really believe in the importance of the Master's word reaching the world. Let us now listen to what happens when Jesus concludes his preaching from Peter's boat. After he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and lower your nets for a catch." Simon said in reply, Master, we have worked hard all night and have caught nothing, but at your command I will lower the nets. When they had done this, they caught a great number of fish and their nets were tearing. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come up to help them. They came and filled both boats so that they were in danger of sinking. Let us not wonder whether Jesus did or did not do a miracle. At most, it would be a strange event, not a miracle. It is a parable that Luke tells us. Let us try to understand what he wants to communicate. Let us notice how once again the figure of Peter stands out, who has a particular task to perform, entrusted to him by the Master. Simon led the boat out into the open sea where the waters are dark and deep, and there he will have to catch fish from this boat. The boat, of course, is the Christian community. What mission does Peter have to carry out? I think it can be summed up in Jesus' words to him during the Last Supper when he announces that he will deny him. But he says to him, Simon, Simon, I have prayed for you, and when you have repented, confirm your brethren in the faith. This is the mission that was entrusted to Peter and his successors. They must recognize their own frailty and maintain the brethren always united in following the Master. What is now the task that he has entrusted to all those who are in the boat and not only to Peter? The boat is the church, poor, fragile. It cannot remain calm on the shore of the lake. She must move away from the shore to go where the waters are deep. Ultimately, one must take a risk because the sea can be very rough. There can be storms, and the church has passed through many of these storms that then calm down. As long as this church is guided by the Master, by his gospel. And what should they do now? Not Peter, but all who are in this boat. Let the nets down to gather the fishes that are in the deep. Simon replies, Master, we have worked hard all night and have caught nothing. But at your command, I will lower the nets. Here, it is not a question of catching fish, it is a parable. What does he mean? We are in the middle of the day. The fish during the day are in the depths. And for a fisher to cast the nets during the day means wasted effort. And there is a lot of work to do afterward. And there is also the great risk of being outwitted by the colleagues who follow common sense, their experience, and see that Peter is doing something absurd. Jesus is saying, the task that I entrust to the community of my disciple, at certain times it may be a request which seems absurd, but if you trust in me, it will bring results. In fact, Peter hesitates because then, if things go wrong, his colleagues will ridicule him. Human logic, in fact, at certain times suggests the opposite of what the gospel instead recommends. But Peter says, human logic would tell me otherwise. But if you ask me, I trust you. I will let the nets down. This decision of the Christian life happens very often when common sense suggests that we should not do what the gospel asks us to do. If we trust the gospel, wonders happen. For example, the gospel asks me to love unconditionally, and at certain times I ask myself, If it is of any use, would it not be better for me to follow the common sense that tells me, think rather for yourself, in your interest, do what you want? Common sense would tell me this, but if you tell me, I trust you, and there will be prodigious results. This is what the parable of the prodigious catch tells us: unconditional forgiveness. Common sense would tell me to make the offender pay for the damage done, but unconditional forgiveness goes against my nature. If I trust in the Master, there will be great result. Human logic says no, but I will do it if he asks me to do it. This is faith. Unconditional love for a spouse will have to be maintained, even if it requires a great commitment, a great sacrifice. Human logic may suggest to me to let it go. People suggest something else. But if you ask me for this unconditional love, I trust you. They may even laugh at me. They may even consider me a loser, a failure. If I can use my skills, the position I have reached, the knowledge I have, and use it to become rich, to accumulate goods, to enjoy life, people would tell me to go ahead and do it. Instead, I put all of myself at the brother's service, of the needy, to create peace and love. He suggests this to me. Whom do I trust? The logic of this world or him? The logic of the world would tell me, follow what I tell you. But Lord, if you ask me, I trust you. I renounce all that the world tells me, and I follow you. This is where the faith is at stake. I prefer to trust in your word because you alone have the words of life. The others are proposals that may be tempting, but they are not words of truth. This is the concluding parable. With this teaching, he who trusts in the Master's word obtains great results, prodigious results. Now we have Peter's reaction. It is the mission that Jesus entrusts to all the disciples. The parable ends, and comes the message addressed to all the Christian community of today.
When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at the knees of Jesus and said, Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. For astonishment at the catch of fish they had made seized him and all those with him. And likewise James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners of Simon. Jesus said to Simon, Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men. When they brought the boat to the shore, they left everything and followed him.
Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. It is not that Peter is confessing to Jesus that he had committed grievous sins in his past life. That is not the meaning of what he said. It is the acknowledgement of his own unworthiness that we find in the Bible on the lips of all those who are called to perform a great mission. When he is called to be a prophet, Isaiah responds by saying, I am lost because I am a man of unclean lips. How can these poor lips of mine speak the name of God? Jeremiah, O Lord God, I do not know how to speak, for I am young. Choose an elder person who is wise. And Moses says, My Lord, I am not a good speaker. How can I go to Pharaoh? I am dull of mouth and tongue. Paul also recognizes his unworthiness. I am the least of all the apostles, and I am not even worthy of being called an apostle because I have been a persecutor. I have approved the death of Stephen. This will be the significant concern Paul will have for the rest of his life. In the second letter to the Corinthians, he will say, we carry a precious treasure, which is the gospel. We carry it in earthen vessels. The clay is impure. We are impure. We have a great treasure to carry into the world, but we carry it in our unworthiness. It is the realization, therefore, of the immense distance between the gospel that we must announce to the world and our incapacity to carry out this mission. Therein lies the astonishment of the result. The disciples were astonished because they had ascertained something marvelous, unexpected. If we ask ourselves, who produces this wonder? We see that it is not Jesus directly, but the disciples' faith. The fact that by trusting in the word of Jesus, they verify extraordinary results. We still think that faith derives from wonders. When one witnesses a miracle, then one begins to believe. No, it is exactly the opposite. Miracles happen when we trust the gospel. If we don't see miracles, the reason is that we trust in our human reason dictated by the flesh, by our impulses, our selfishness, and we don't trust in what He asks of us. We would like to take humankind out of the inhuman conditions in which it is, and we try diplomacy with our trickery, and we do not obtain any result because they all start from selfish national interests. If we would try to trust in the gospel, we would see prodigies of salvation, a world of brothers and sisters, of peace, of love, of equitable sharing of goods. The task that Jesus entrusts to his community is not to be fishers of men. To fish in Greek is alieuein, and here is not this verb but sogrein, which means to bring to life. It is the task that Jesus entrusted to the community of his disciples to bring people to life, bringing them out of the waters of death. Lake Galilee, I have said before, is beautiful, calm, and serene, but here it is taken as an image of the deep, chaotic abyss, a symbol of the forces of evil that entangle, overwhelm, drag people into the dark depths of non life. They are waters of death, the bondage of vice, moral corruption, the slavery of those who live to accumulate money. All these are waters of death. They must be taken out. They are waters of death in which it is impossible to live. The condition of those who are enslaved of grudges, of blackmail, of remorse, those who are chained to a failed past, they no longer know how to get out. They must be freed. If we also think of the condition of humanity, don't we see it perhaps swallowed up by violence, wars, selfishness, and hatred? It must be liberated. This is the task of the Christian community. Then what is the net to fish with? It is only one, the word of the gospel. And only when people are caught by this word can they be taken out. It is not possible to get out of these conditions following human criteria. It is not possible to establish peace in the world. All these attempts fail because they do not derive from love, but from interest, from selfishness. It is the gospel that brings people out of darkness, out of chaos, from the bad moral choices, from the meaninglessnesses of life. It brings people to light. What happens now with the disciples? They have pulled their boats ashore, they have left everything and followed Jesus. They have not stopped being fishermen. They have continued doing what they were doing before. But after knowing Jesus, after having found the gospel, they were no longer the same. The profession is the same, but it is carried out in another way, with other objectives, not to exploit the brother, but to serve the brother. So, when the profession is carried out listening to what he suggests, not what the logic of the world suggests, we see wonders. If, on the other hand, we continue to do what everybody else does, or what we did before, then it means that we have not yet found the gospel of Christ. I wish you all a good Sunday and a good week.